What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in considering the last fight for Dustin Poirier's storied, exemplary career, I'm getting very nervous that they are going to end up making this Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier. And I know you say, oh, Nate Diaz is retired, bro. He retired back in 2022. He's not even with the UFC anymore.
Wait, Nate told me something. Now, you guys, this probably won't surprise you. There are rules to being Nate Diaz's friend. There are rules. And one of those rules is if you get a call from Nate, you don't share the content of the call with Nate. It could be the last call that you ever get from Nate, but this one's different. This one's different, and I need to come to you guys. Because I'm catching up with Nate. He's off doing this movie. Hey, Nate, what are you doing? He says, hey, I got out The Ultimate Fighter. I'm in Vegas for The Ultimate Fighter. Start visiting with him a little bit about UFC, and I asked him straight up, where do you want to fight? And he did not hesitate at all. We were on the topic of boxing, but he did not hesitate at all. He said the UFC. He said, Chael, what I learned. He said the best fighters in the world are at the UFC. It was a very nice compliment. There is a question, in fairness, would the UFC sign him? And the reason that's relevant, you remember Alice Drover and, hey, honey, my beautiful wife just came out here. You remember the great Damian Maia. Damian Maia is one of the greats ever. And those guys hit a certain age. The UFC said, we're not re-signing them. We then got reports of Nick Diaz. And not only was Nick signed and in the pool, he even had a bout agreement, complete with a date and a location. And then all of a sudden, we hear from George Masvidal that he is back. And then out of nowhere, we hear from Cowboy Cerrone that he is back. So what is going on with Nate? Like, what is going on, and how exactly do we help that? And I said something to Nate. I said, Nate, I basically said what I just said to you guys. Hey, Nate, if you want to come back, why aren't you back? And I'm trusting that it's because somebody on the other end of the phone said, hey, that's just not a direction that we're going. But it didn't seem like that happened. In fact, I think Nate said something along the lines of, they don't know, I'm going to let them know real soon. It was something like that. I said, Nate, come out. Come out. Join the team, even if for a day. And then we'll go talk to Dana, right? Like, if you want to let them know, I can help you let them know. So, because of that, and because of my friend Nate Diaz wants it to be known that he wants to come back. And if things go well, guys, we might get that one more time.
The UFC will pull strings, whatever necessary, to do what they feel like the large portion of the fan base would love to see. Okay? And that's what concerns me about this. And let me explain to you why. Okay? Nothing against Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz has been in the UFC. He's a legend. Nate Diaz is a legend, okay? But anytime he has gotten up against the top level guys, he's always lost. You know, he's never held a title, okay? Now, Dustin Poirier has only held the interim title himself, but he has fought at the very top, the best of the best, okay? And the type of career that he has had to come back still at 36 years old to be just barely trailing on that outside edge of the prime. It depends on who you ask. If you ask one group of people, they say, oh, Dustin Poirier is still in his prime. He's at the end of it, but he's still in it. Then you ask the next guys, oh, he's completely out of his prime. You know, could be a little bit of both, but Nate Diaz is to be 40 years old coming April, okay? And he's almost there now. Nate Diaz is almost 40 years old. By the time this fight could potentially take place, Nate Diaz would be 40 years old. You know, there's been talks about Ilia Topuria coming up to 155, Dustin Poirier welcoming him. I would love to see that fight. I think that will be a fight that if Dustin did beat Ilia Topuria, it would put a shit ton of shine on his name as he walks out the door. Maybe he wouldn't want to walk out the door if he beat Ilia Topuria, to be fair, but that is one that I could get my mouth watering on, right? But if he loses to Ilia Topuria, people are going to say, well, damn, Ilia Topuria beat Max, knocked out Max Holloway, knocked out Volkanovski. I mean, this guy's the next best thing. It wouldn't take anything away from the storied career and the legacy Dustin Poirier has already created for himself. Okay. Now, I know the thing is he wants to go out on a win. He's made the comment, legends only. Patty Pimblett's been calling him out, trying to get that fight. You can't blame Patty for trying, but it's been made clear by Dustin Poirier, legends only. This is not going to be Patty Pimblett or anybody of the sort. He's mentioned Justin Gaethje. The problem with that fight is Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker are set to clash very soon. Okay, so the timing's not right. If he's waiting on Dan Hooker or Justin Gaethje for his final hoorah, he's going to be waiting a while. He's going to be skipping his usual, oh, well, it's been, 4 months, 5 months, whatever, since I fought last, right? But what concerns me about this is the casual fan base, okay? And there are a lot of people out there that just love Nate Diaz because of who he is, because of his character, because his I don't give a F attitude. But it has really little to do with his actual fighting, okay? And Nate Diaz is not only almost 40 years old, but he's not been in the octagon since September of 2022. I would hate to see, because of the pressure of the casual and the large fan base talking about this fight, the UFC sign Nate Diaz to some sort of contract that's going to give him a few more fights, or sign him to another contract with the UFC, because he's talked about coming back at 40 years old. Just doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to me to me, that would diminish the career of Dustin Poirier to have his last fight be against a 40-year-old Nate Diaz. Albeit, Nate Diaz is a legend. He's a legend for different reasons than Dustin Poirier. He's a legend because he talks a lot of shit. He's a legend because he smokes weed. He's a legend because he has really, really good cardio and has learned to weaponize cardio. So he's one of those guys that, even though he's never beat the top guys, he still always managed to be there. He's just a guy that's impossible to kill. And that's one of the things that endears him to the fans. It's like, you can't put out Nate Diaz. No matter how bad of a beating you inflict on him, his ass, in most cases, is still going to be there in the 5th round or the end of the 3rd round or whatever it is, right? And that's one of the reasons that fans love him. Fair enough. But Dustin Poirier has had an exemplary career. Okay? He's younger, he's sharper, and to put him in there against a 40-year-old Nate Diaz who has not been in the octagon since September of 2022. That, to me, is a slap in the face to the career of Dustin Poirier, a guy who has challenged for a title 3 times, has held the interim belt, has beat the very top guys. It's a slap in the face, bro. And what bothers me about it is, I know Dustin would do it too. They've been chitter chattering online, and Dustin is responding in kind, like, yeah, I'd love that fight. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. It stresses me out, man. No. Dustin, please, bro. No. I would honestly rather see Dustin Poirier take the fight against Paddy Pimblett, who's not even ranked in the top 10. I would rather see him take that than I would rather see him fight a 40-year-old Nate Diaz who's not been in the octagon in 3 years. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I know that's a big statement. And the reason I say that is because the style of Paddy Pimblett being a really strong grappler, I think that could potentially be a problem for Dustin. As in, I think he could potentially lose that. And now I'm not saying for sure because you have to look at somebody like Dustin who gave quite a bit of trouble to Islam Makhachev just recently. You can't really say with a straight face that Paddy Pimblett's better than Islam Makhachev, right? But as far as styles making fights, that's one of those that I could potentially see being an issue for Dustin as far as wanting to make sure that he wins his retirement fight. You understand? Nate Diaz, not so much. Don't think it will be a problem. I think Dustin would easily handle a 40-year-old Nate Diaz coming back into the octagon after being out for 3 years and on ice for 3 years as far as MMA goes, right? Now listen, he's the triathlete. He's one of the toughest son of a bitches on the planet. Nate Diaz has proven that over and over and over again. So there's always a chance, just like in the first Connor fight, that Dustin beats the shit out of him for 3.5, 4 rounds. And then for some crazy reason, Dustin just falls flat on his face, gasses out. Next thing you know, Nate Diaz is starting to march down Dustin Poirier at the end of the fight and then end up, there's no telling what could happen at that point. Nate's a bigger man. He's got a good 3 inches in height on Dustin. Be a bigger, heavier guy on fight night. Plus, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu background of Nate. I mean, you could potentially, you know, potentially see that possibly happening in some worlds, in some circles. And I wouldn't necessarily put it past Nate Diaz to come in and do something like that and be like, surprise, surprise, motherfuckers. I wouldn't. It wouldn't surprise me. But I don't think it would happen. But I do think that this would be a slap in the face to the career of Dustin Poirier for him to fight old ass, 40 years old, been out of the octagon for 3 years, retired Nate Diaz. And you're saying to me, bro, why are you talking about this? They're not going to do that. How long you been watching the UFC? You ever heard that term? If it makes dollars, it makes sense. Okay, and I don't need to repeat that, right? You're with me here. You understand that these two have been jawing at each other for years and years and years. And listen, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it'd have been a great fight. I mean, it'd been hard to make it happen. Nate Diaz has been fighting most of his career, at least the latter part of it at 170. So that, they had to do something about the weight there. Probably either a catch weight or Dustin just go up to 170. But this would have been a good, fun, hell yeah, I can't wait to see this 4 years ago. Now, 40-year-old Nate Diaz out of the octagon for 3 years, no thanks, bro. Because that's a lose-lose for Dustin Poirier. Because if he beats Nate Diaz, now listen, I know he has a big name, and I know that's what Dustin's thinking, and that's one of the reasons it scares me. Nate Diaz is trying to inject himself into it because that will be a huge fight. Dustin Poirier has a huge name. Nate Diaz is talking about coming back to the UFC. He's been talking about it, right? But what scares me is Dustin seems open to it too. I'm like, no, bro. Because if he beats Nate Diaz, people are going to say, what the hell kind of going away party was that, bro? You beat a damn over the hill 40-year-old Nate Diaz who's not been in the octagon in 3 years. Oh, hurrah for the career of Dustin Poirier. People are going to say you went out easy, purposely went out easy. That's what people are going to say. And then let's flip that coin over. You also have a guy like Nate Diaz who potentially, you guys know, Nobody expected Nate Diaz to beat Conor McGregor. I mean, when you go skill for skill, especially on the feet, Conor McGregor was a much better fighter than Nate Diaz in terms of their striking. You got to admit that. He was in both fights. Nate Diaz was getting pieced up. Only in the first one, Conor wasn't ready for that big ass hard headed dude to still be there in rounds 3 and 4 once he started to kind of slow down a little bit. And then we all know what happened from there. Nate kind of took over, right? What if that happened to Dustin? So if he beats him, oh, whoop-de-doo, you beat a 40-year-old retired Nate Diaz that hasn't been in the octagon in 3 years. Way to go, Dustin. And then, God forbid, for some reason, Nate Diaz comes in there and ends up winning the fight. You really want to go out? You really want that to be your retirement fight? Oh, Dustin, bro, you had a storied career until that very last fight. And then you got beat by a retired 40-year-old, hadn't been in the octagon in 3 years, Nate Diaz. Like, no thanks, bro. No thanks. And I think from a fan's perspective, I don't want to see it for all of the aforementioned facts. But I also don't think that Dustin should want that fight either. Not now. Not now, dude. Not for your retirement fight. No. No. I mean, I can see why Nate wants it. He wants to come back, make some more money. That's a huge fight. But for Dustin, nah, bro. Listen, 9 out of 10 times, maybe 19 out of 20, Dustin beats, Nate Diaz, especially if it's a 3-rounder or something like that. Probably won't be, I imagine, a fight like that, especially if they were to include Nate. They probably, even if it was a co-main event, they'd probably make it 5 rounds. I'm sure they would do that. But it's not a guarantee, and it's a lose-lose because even if he wins, he's beating up an old retired guy with ring rust, right? But then if he loses, I mean, I'm sorry, dude, you're talking about a stain on an exemplary career. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. And I just, a lot of you are probably thinking, oh, bro, that's, have you seen online? It's, yeah. Dustin keeps mentioning it. Nate is obviously inserting himself. I mean, called, Dustin a pussy the other day online for not taking the Patty fight, just trying to like edge himself in there so people will start talking about Dustin and Nate. He's trying to set this thing up, bro. That's what Nate does. He's trying to set this up. So if you think for 1 second that it couldn't happen, it wouldn't happen, and the UFC would not make some sort of concession in Nate Diaz's case and in Dustin Poirier's retirement fight status, think again. Because like I said, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And unfortunately, that fight would make a lot of dollars. I'm not saying it makes sense, but it would make a lot of dollars. I just don't want to see it, man. I just do not want to see that. That would literally, I think, just irritate me to see someone as good as Dustin Poirier taking that last fight against a retired Nate Diaz that's not been in the octagon in 3 years. Don't want to see it, man. Don't want to see it. What do you guys think? Should he sit out, wait for the winner of Gagey versus Hooker? I mean, what should happen here? I mean, I think that's the move. Either that or, I know Ilia Topuria wants to come to lightweight. He and his team want Dustin Poirier. I think that'd be a good fight. Because if he loses that, I mean, Ilya is on his way to, being one of the best ever. He's already knocked out 2 of the best ever, and so you gotta look and think if Dustin were able for some reason to get over on Ilya. I mean, that put a lot of shine on Dustin's name as he exited, right? And then if he loses, it's like, well, I mean, Ilia Topuria is one of the greats. He's knocked out a couple of the greats, and now he's knocked out Dustin Poirier. Ilya wants that, I don't know, man. Just don't let it be Nate Diaz. What do you guys think? If you would, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and again, comment down below. Let me know what you think. I will see you guys on the next one. Thanks so much for watching.